Hey everybody, I'm going to be reading from the New International Version, Mark chapter 5 verses 24 through 34. So it goes like this. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in a crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding was stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people are crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling in fear, told him the truth. He said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So today's message, sermon, or conversation is not going to be the normal one. I'm going to share some aspects that really jump out about this passage, and I'm going to ask you to make some decisions and then take them to the Lord. And if somewhere in that process of trying to find answers and in your time of prayer with the Lord, that you come up with something you want, if you feel like you want to share with me, please email me, let me know. Okay. I'm probably going to, I probably should credit, I'm going to give credit to Tyson Walker, my son-in-law. I've mentioned him a lot of times about being the one who wants to have feelings, be safe in conversations. In fact, safe conversation is something that just came up the other day. Shelley and I were in an online meeting with other pastors from the Northwest region. Our district overseer was asking how we were doing, how things were going in light of a worldwide pandemic. Most of the, not only the overseer, but a lot of the pastors are from Washington State. So there's the second highest rate of infection of all states in the U.S., except for maybe New York. So things have been pretty intense over there. So we went from one pastoral couple to another sharing, and most of them, the reports actually were kind of logistic in nature, like what online platform are you using to communicate with your people, how you're communicating with your people, how are you doing worship, how are you doing normal stuff in a very abnormal kind of environment. And anyway, we all go through there, and we get to I think there were almost the second to last couple, and it's Jimmy John and Donna Morris. They're pastors at, I think, the Kent Vineyard in Washington State. And instead of giving the expected roll call report, and he just rolls right into, "Now, I hate this." He says, "I hate doing worship this way. I don't like the sound. I don't like," and he just went on naming one thing after another that he just couldn't stand. And as I thought to myself, I started feeling it. I said, "Jimmy John, I hate you. I wish I had said all that. I wish I had felt, free at that moment to just kind of roll out, because yes, there's all these platforms to consider, but the amount of work, and it's not just even the amount of work, it's like, are you really accomplishing what you really want to accomplish? Are you really creating what you have been able to recreate before?" And so after going through all of that, I realized that, being able to find safety in a conversation, it means a lot. Safe places are places where real thoughts and feeling comes out. Honest, you can be real. Places where you, for some reason, there's no judgments that are held against you. Acceptance is provided and spaces made for you so you can sort out even the most mixed up, painful, and distressing issues. And Jimmy John felt that, and I said, I want that. And that's so important. When we read our scripture reading from Mark, it's actually a very public setting. There's no social or physical distancing there. People are wanting to experience life. They want to get exposed to what's going on. So they experience, if you want to experience the world, just listen, just look around. In fact, don't even do that. Just jump into it and you'll become part of the mob and you experience it all. And, so that's the world, that's the setting for the scripture. There's lots of people there everywhere, lots going on. But it's just not the kind of place where if you want to have a private conversation or a place where you can discuss something that's sensitive or difficult. And that's assuming that you have the courage to actually do that, but it's not that kind of place. So we find out not only does the woman have a problem with the setting and being able to be safe there and just unpack what she's doing, she really has significant problems. And her problem is not something she wants to call attention to. She's having, as we read the scripture, she's having gender-related health issues, so that's the first obstacle. It's a chronic health issue, so that's the second obstacle. Doctors haven't been able to help her. That's a third obstacle. She's actually getting worse seeking help. That's the fourth obstacle. This is a major, she might as well be trying out for the Marines, right? And she's there after 12 years of pursuing help. That's another obstacle. So this does not begin to, and none of this begins to even address, the socio-emotional trauma she's gone through. It doesn't even begin to speak to the religious stigmatizing that she's had to deal with and fight through, despite all the initiative she takes to correct the issue. And then, in spite of all that initiative, being left in a worse situation than when she started. So if you just think, if you could just imagine what her state of mind is at that point, the desperateness, the futileness, how overwhelming she feels, it's kind of a story where there's a lot of people moving around, there's a lot of talk, maybe even excitement, but in the middle of all that, there's a terrible thing happening in this one person. Nothing is getting better for her. Her doctors have committed malpractice. Her healthcare program has left her in worse condition, and on top of that, she's dead broke as a result of it. I don't see a happy picture. Big picture experience of life, where people are all popping around and doing their thing and experiencing life and engaging in stuff. Here's this one person in the margins, not happy. Verse 27 says, when she heard about Jesus, she came up from behind him in a crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Interesting, huh? All the signs of healing apart, I find this the most amazing part, in my mind, of the whole story. This is the miracle. This part, that thinking in her head, and that consideration of something that could happen that's positive. I sim I simply don't know many people like this. I mean, even Christians, among the Christian community, I don't know many people who, after that length of time, that expense, the human investment, doing all that she did, as long as she did, who ever considered the possibility of doing something like that. If I just reach out and touch him, I will be healed. I know I have known many Christians. I mean, I have personal friends that have actually had experiences just like this. Maybe just not for 12 years, but just like this. Met with doctors from all over the state, flown to the mainland dozens of times to meet with specialists there. And these people aren't rich on top of it. To arrive at a point that after 3 years, and these are Christians again, Christians, just wanting to die. Desperate, manically depressed, having no hope, having only the desire to die and put it into all. And these people are not just financially destroyed, but emotionally and spiritually destroyed. So personally, when I read this story, I'm just amazed at these 9 or so words. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And again, I'm not talking about the science of healing clothes, mind you, but rather, where does that thought come from? If I just touch his clothes, I'm going to be healed. Where does that inspiration come from? I mean, what cereal box is she eating from? Where do those hope-filled, emotionally established words find their origin in a person that's been completely outdone and buried? I've heard a lot of sermons about how it was the faith of the woman that healed her. Heck, even the scripture says that, verse 34. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." I've heard all the sermons. In fact, I have never heard a sermon on this passage that didn't make the focal point of their sermon that the woman had faith and that healed her. That made the difference. But I'm not talking about the woman reaching out to Jesus. The faith move, to reach out and touch. I'm talking about the woman who has been climbing a virtual Mount Everest as if she had no legs and no arms, and doing it for 12 years, and has met more failure, discouragement, and despair, having no less to show for her effort than possibly even Job did. Yet that person who has had so much bad luck, so many terrible things happen, turn from that state of mind, body, and soul, the whole thing, to reach out and say to herself, I can do this. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Where does that come from? Where does that thinking, where does the thought, where does the inspiration, where does the strength or courage even come from to speak those words? Now, many of you know, Auntie Shelley and I, we've been through some pretty crazy things. She's doing well, recovering from a very challenging blood disorder, and she's probably one who's survived 3 attacks. Usually most people don't survive 2. She's survived 3 attacks, and one that's of another order. You could probably, some of you know her because she's pretty easygoing. You say, oh, well, she's like Auntie Shelley. That's just her personality, just the way she is. You could say, some people could say that maybe she's a half full type of person. Shelley is the half full type of person. She's always cheerio, up and away. All things work together for good for those who believe in God and are called according to His purpose. She's that kind of person. Yeah, just fine. Okay. And you say, okay, that would make sense. Until you hear the voices of others who are not like Auntie Shelley. And they say, do I have to become that other person? Maybe I'm not enough. I don't have enough to be that person. So what happens to people when things don't get better? And I'm not talking about 2 years later, but when diagnoses don't come back clear and clean. I mean, when things actually get worse, like they did for this woman. Like when the biopsy comes back positive. When it gets worse, and when it gets worse, you're worse not after 2 years, but after 12 years. What catches me in the story, and like a big gong, ching, like that, is that there's a turn that happens here. This woman is just fitting into the margins of life, and then, where she's dealing with her condition and all that goes with it, and then there's a turn. And you almost get the sense that the turn is a turn from looking at her feet, and she begins to look up to the sky. She turns from her heart's despair and hopelessness to a sense of confidence and courage. It's a turn from despair and despondency to, a bubbling up kind of warrior rising confidence. I mean, that catches, it's got to catch your attention. It catches me, this confidence that if I just touch him, I will be healed. Where's that come from? I cannot escape. Where does that come from? I mean, the story itself, after that kind of goes on, documents the fact how she gets healed. She knows something has changed. She feels it. She experiences it existentially as well as physically and emotionally. She says immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. Wow, that's a pretty kind of clear and definitive way of saying you're not the same. You've changed. It's better. And Jesus feels it too. I mean, it's not just that she's feeling it. Jesus screams like he's been assaulted. He felt it. She felt it. He feels it. And Scripture reads it this way. And at once Jesus realized power had gone out from him, and he turned around and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Hey, now how whatever was happening there, the hustling and bustling, it is even more crazy right now. And the disciples are kind of like, what just happened? They say, "You see people crowding us?" His disciples answered, "And you ask us who touched me?" You know what the disciples are saying? The disciples are wondering whether Jesus is having a premature onset moment. That's what they're alluding to. Are you seriously asking me that question, asking us that question, Jesus? Or is this a parable you're doing or something? Because this is just kind of went right past us. Scripture says Jesus doesn't even respond to them. He just keeps looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Not exactly the private moment, the sensitive setting, the discreet place, the safe space. But it just comes out. She just outs herself. She gets real. She wasn't lying, and Jesus wasn't paraboling either. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Daughter is an endearing term. I may be no, I am projecting. But let me make my point. In my culture, in Native Hawaiian culture, to speak in those terms is to draw a person into or within a circle, a particular circle, a family circle. Family means a lot to Hawaiians. And Hawaiian families are not like traumatized Western European families or haole families. Hawaiian families are more circular in their relationships. So unlike haoles who view their relationships and obligations more like the spokes on a bike's wheel, so the person in the center of their relationship, and then they have relationships going outward to individuals. Instead of that, Hawaiians are more like, if you're connected to someone in the circle, you're in the circle. If you know someone that the other person knows, that means something. It may seem odd, but it means something. Just sharing relations is a movement toward each other, toward connection. This woman has been drawn into a circle, Jesus' circle. To say daughter to someone not connected by blood could designate a sign of affection. But to speak into a person's life in a Hawaiian family moves closer to adoption. Was Jesus really more brown than white? Okay, that was a political joke. I just thought I'd throw it out there. But joking and speculation aside, a lot could be made of the woman's faith and should be noted and should be spotlighted and gaslighted and held up as a source of encouragement and for discipleship. It definitely is. That move, her move to reach out and touch, that's why it's preached that way all the time. But again, to the most amazing event in the story, in my mind, it's not the tail end where she gets healed. The amazing event is earlier in the story, where the person who has been through it all finds that whatever it was to try to climb, to do again, to climb up that mountain, to ignore 12 years of medical failure and assistance. Did you get that? 12 years of medical assistance. I mean, that is 4,272 days of failure upon failure and malpractice. That's 102,528 hours of being conditioned by despair and futility. And in the process of that, to find unobtrusive ways to cope with failing bodies while others mock and ostracize you. It's about doing life while bearing the loneliness of isolation. It's about, after all of that, going through all of that, pushing yourself to come out from under that rock of pain and suffering to try and hope yet again, one more time. to hope again. That's amazing. I mean, it's not amazing, it's miraculous. That's the miracle. The miracle, the actual physical healing and everything, it's kind of like, okay, so here's the head of the animal, here's the tail. The actual healing is like the tail, but the front end is the turn from all the junk to a sense of hope and confidence. So how's that happen? Where does it come from? How did that change happen in that woman? That's the question I leave you with. I think it speaks a lot, not only to people who had intense and severe suffering, but it speaks to possibility of great hope in those times. So talk among yourself. Where does a turn like that happen? How did it happen? What in Scripture gives us a clue in terms of how that is brought about? You know what? When you do, share it with me. Talk to you later.